share these things. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for attending our presentation on theory, instructional design, and creative strategies, teaching ethics across the curriculum. My name is Ashley Astral Paycheck. I am an assistant professor for the clinical mental health program at Lock Haven University. We are a 100% online K-CREP program since 2012. So I will let my colleague or my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, I am Kelly Forziat Pytel. I am also an assistant professor at Lock Haven University, soon to be known as the Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania. But I'm also teaching in the clinical mental health counseling program. And I'm excited to be here today with two of our students. So Kira, if you want to introduce yourself next.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kira Hughes. And like Dr. Pytel had just mentioned, I just graduated from Lock Haven last Friday, and I got my NCC. So I will pass it on to Nancy here.
Thank you, and thanks for attending. My name is Nancy Butts. I also just graduated as of last Friday with my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and I'm one of the older students because I already have been a licensed attorney for more than 30 years, looking for some training and education to maybe re-enter the workforce after retirement in a slightly different way. So.
Wonderful, thank you. So as you likely already know, theory, instructional design, and creativity are really important for engagement and learning, not just online, but also in the face-to-face platform. This presentation is going to focus on these three aspects as it relates to teaching ethics across the curriculum. We hope that each of you as participants will walk away with a better understanding of adult learning theory and social learning theory and how it occurs in the classroom. We're also hoping that you'll be able to identify a few different technologies and how this can be incorporated into teaching ethics in various courses, as well as different creative and practical strategies for infusing ethics into various courses. Okay, I will open it up to the group. I see that there's a few of you here and just wanted to open it up to you, to the participants. Who are you? Are you a student? Are you an educator? Are you a supervisor? And what, why are you attending, or what are you hoping to get out of the presentation today?
I can go. My name is Emily Hill. I am a PhD student in the Counselor Education and Supervision program here at the Chicago School. And I'm also a licensed professional counselor in Louisiana in private practice. So I am hoping to just learn a little bit more about teaching ethics. I'm doing some of my teaching internships right now at this point in the program. So just interested in learning a little bit more about that dynamic.
Wonderful, thank you for sharing.
I see you're a student in the CMHC program, which is great. So we've got kind of two perspectives here. And then Jose, it looks like I'm a school counselor and I hope to gain new ideas on ethical dilemmas. Ooh, that'll be something that we'll have to build in a little bit to our presentation.
Hi, my name is Allison Mann, and I'm in the clinical mental health counseling master's program here at the Chicago School. I'm just kind of looking to learn a little bit about how ethics is taught, just from the student perspective. I guess that's really just it, but I think it'll be very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison.
Hi, I'm Latrina Radler. I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor in Louisiana. and I'm a doctoral student at the University of New Orleans. I'm also an adjunct professor at Grand Canyon University. I am here just to learn a little bit more about teaching ethics, and I'm glad to be here today.
Thank you. A great mix of attendees, which is great. I will say that our presentation is geared a little bit more to the counselor educators and supervisors, but students too. You'll hear from our students their perspective in taking our classes and what it was like to learn ethics, for ways that we can do better, and ways that we are doing well. So it's great to have all of you here today. We do realize on the slide there's a little bit of a hiccup in that we're showing sort of our presenting or our non-presenting view. You can kind of see our notes and our slides on the side, but just let us know if there's any issues where you can't actually see the slide that we're talking about. So I'll turn this over to Kira, who's going to talk a little bit about social learning theory. We'll talk about two different theories today, and then we'll tie it all together for why it's important for teaching ethics. And teaching ethics in, we teach in an online program, but also this can be very transferable to the face-to-face setting as well.
I think we're passing this actually over to Nancy.
It's all good. Okay, one of the interesting things about social learning theory is that when Albert Bandura initially began in the field, he was a professor at Stanford. He was firmly ensconced in the whole behavioral approach, and he started to observe the behaviors of individual children and how they reacted to what they saw around them. So he initially created this theory of social learning, that behavior is learned from the environment through observation and imitation. But then in the course of studying it, he discovered that there were some factors that influenced whether or not a person would not only observe, but also then choose to imitate. And those people, those models, the people who are observed, they're the ones that would provide examples of the behavior, whatever the behavior was, but then also it would all the individuals would have to encode that behavior or convert the information that they observed or they perceived into a form that they could use for the future. And there were a couple of different categories that Professor Bandura had identified that influenced whether or not a model would be chosen and whether or not that behavior would actually be not just observed, but also encoded or converted to be used for the future. Things like the similarity of the model. Is it a parent? Is it a classmate? So if we talk about learning in the context of a classroom, whether it be online or in person, how do we identify with the other people that we're observing? Or is it on YouTube? Are we watching a video? Is it someone like a movie star or an influencer that we're learning from that speaks to us, that makes us want to pay attention and replicate that behavior? Is it the behavior, once it's observed, as the person watching the model, how is that behavior reinforced? Is it reinforced positively? Is it reinforced negatively? Or is it just flat out punished? Because remember, at this point, we're coming from the B.F. Skinner operant conditioning mode. So we've got a lot of positive and negative reinforcement influencing what's happening. But also now, is the person being directly influenced, or are they living through it vicariously? Like, I see my older sibling be treated a certain way when they behaved a certain way. So, I guess I'm not going to do that behavior, or maybe I'm more likely to do that behavior because I've seen how it's received and how the person modeling the behavior is rewarded. And then what are the frequency of the reactions to the behavior by others? Very similar situation where you see the way your older sibling, for example, behaves, and you see how your parents react. Is it always reacted? Is the reaction always positive? Is it negative? Is it mixed? observing those consequences to determine if copying that behavior would be appropriate. So the difference between Bandura and just straight up operant conditioning is the cognitive perspective. Is there a cognitive component to this, or mediation? Are there factors that influence an individual's ability to observe, imitate, and then learn from that? And what Bandura did was he identified 4 different categories: attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. And that he found that these were individually 4 very important factors to determine, as I said, whether or not after you observe that behavior, is it going to be imitated and then used in the future. Attention means, how did we get exposed to the behavior? Did we notice the behavior? Clearly, if you don't recognize something is happening, you can't repeat it or be aware that it may be a favorable activity or a way of doing things that would be beneficial to you. So of course you have to be attentive to it. Second, retention. How well is the behavior remembered? If you only catch a part of it or you don't see the whole of the behavior, you're not going to be able to have an accurate picture of what that behavior is in order to properly observe it and imitate it and make it your own. Reproduction. Is it capable of being reproduced? It may be limited by your physical ability, and that could affect your decision as to whether or not you observe it at all. Think about an individual watching someone on a tennis court playing tennis and thinking, boy, I'd love to serve like that. But if you're physically challenged and you can't accomplish those actions, then it isn't some behavior that you're really going to pay attention to. And obviously you're not going to be able to imitate because you don't have the physical capability of doing that. And the last one is motivation. What is the desire to perform the behavior? What are the possible rewards or punishment that could occur if you repeat those behaviors? So those 4 particular factors bring that cognitive component into the social learning theory, which is building on that whole theory of operant conditioning that started in the late 50s, 60s, and 1960s. As the primary method of learning that psychologists believe drove everyone's behavior.
Thank you, Nancy. So now we're going to get into adult learning theory. So this research was kind of based off of Joseph C. Chen, 2014 with DePaul University. And so to date, no research has really examined the learning experience of adult students. So what they were looking at is there's rapid growth of adult learners in the United States, and we consider that population 25 and older. In 2000 to 2009, this was an error, it was not 49% increase, it was actually 43 increase in adult learners compared to the 27% below age 25. So really we're looking at the focus here has been on that traditional youth-centric models. And if we go into kind of barriers here, adults are not really attracted to that affirmational educational model. We've kind of already been there, done that per se. Another thing is they may not want to participate due to feeling as if they don't really belong. So that's another barrier. So some foundations here is self-directed, transformative, and critical reflection. So with self-directed, most adult learners tend to view themselves as something else first, and then a student as follows. So an employee, then a student, a parent, then a student. So we have to take that into consideration. So with being self-directed, we're not really necessarily a blank slate. We have this kind of innate desire to learn, and you view the teacher not really as a gatekeeper, but more of a facilitator and collaborator on learning, rather than when you would, in your younger years. So next here we have is transformative, and that kind of occurs as like a default. It's a long-standing beliefs or challenges, and academics kind of serve as that trigger for your prior pain, including like confusion, conflict, and discomfort. So like I said, that kind of defaults that and challenges those barriers. And then lastly, we have the critical reflection piece, which was also this one really stood out for me. in my master's program is challenging assumptions, exploration, and like develop reflective skepticism. So it really kind of expands your own worldview and kind of gets into that discussion and how things are and how else we can view them. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Pytel, and we'll kind of get into ways that we utilize this in our courses.
Great, thank you. So altogether, when we're thinking about social learning theory and adult theory, this is really to help educators recognize unique learning needs in the classroom, again, whether it be face-to-face or online, along with how to better facilitate this learning through different teaching modalities. So if we look at the next slide, what does the literature say about how to teach ethics in counselor education? What you see here is, well, first off, there is limited research. So there are a lot of different teaching methods that you can see if you search how to teach ethics online or ways to teach ethics, however you search it. There's case studies, there's role plays, there's how to use ethical decision-making models, or how to use the ACA or any sort of ethical codes or guidelines to teach. And so there's a lot out there that are just suggestions or ideas, but none of these really go a step further to test via research. And so we don't know how effective these methods are or not, but it does give us some ideas as educators for how we can go about infusing diverse teaching methods for teaching ethics across the counselor education curriculum. I'll let Dr. Paycheck step in here, but you will see in a couple of slides how we've used some of this information to develop our coursework.
Yeah, and that's really what the literature says. There's no clear-cut best or effective way of teaching. More than anything, like Dr. Pytel said, it's recommendations and reporting back what are common activities that we do. And so with the ethical decision-making model, I'm sure you're all familiar probably with a different model, whether it's a 5-step model. That's what we prefer to use at our program because we feel like it's easier to remember 5 steps. But there's other models as well that are just as effective. I know there's another program of a colleague of mine, they use a 10-step model. And like Dr. Pytel mentioned, most literature recommends, whether you're identifying legal, ethical, or moral dilemmas or situations, to ACA is our guiding body. So always utilizing those codes in the state laws in which you're practicing as a counselor. And then different case studies where the students are given scenarios or different cases where they can then have discussions, apply the ethical decision-making model, simply identify what an ethical, moral, or legal issue may be from the case study. And so Dr. Pytel has talked about a couple other experiential activities, which also tie real nicely into adult learning theory and social learning theory, where you can learn from others, but then you can also apply what you're learning to real world scenarios.
So here we are starting our creative and our practical strategies for teaching ethics across the curriculum. We won't have time to cover all that we do, but we've selected 3 good examples of strategies that can be used at various points of the counselor education curriculum. So when you think about it, your new students coming in, students that you've had in the program for a while, and then students who are getting ready to graduate and who are in their clinical work. And other ideas of how to reach those students. And again, really our purpose is to highlight across the curriculum, because so often students are just hitting ethics, hardcore in that ethics class. And we need to remind students of the importance and how to apply them throughout their time in the program.
And so also keeping in mind, we selected 3, like Dr. Pytel said, 3 different courses that come in different, I realize programs have different course sequences. For us, our lifespan is one of the first classes more often than not that our students take. But we also wanted to give some thought and attention to asynchronous and synchronous courses as well, because we know there's folks in the room that maybe teach from both platforms as well. These can also very easily be translated into the on-campus or face-to-face platform. So perhaps while we're talking about some of these assignments and how we infuse ethics into them, give some thought and some consideration to that, and also consider what Nancy and Kyra were saying about adult learning theory and social learning theory. So I think Dr. Pytel and myself will talk about our first strategy, which I mentioned is lifespan. It is an asynchronous course that we teach online. And so we, one of the assignments where we infuse early on ethics is in a final project that the students submit both individually and then later on have a class discussion. So basically what they do, and we listed here, and we've listed on each of the next two slides, this slide and the next two, what the assignment looks like for you to kind of reference. So what we do is we have students create a case study based on their favorite TV character, their favorite film, maybe it's a book character. And then what they do is they select a character that will help them identify different lifespan issues and allow them to analyze that particular character and apply all of the information that they've learned throughout the course in this final project. So then what they do is they create their PowerPoint presentation. We usually give them some sort of outline to help guide them through this process. We always encourage creativity. So sometimes students will infuse different clips or pictures in their presentation. And then what they do is they record, and we've kind of played around with the time frame, you know, some anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. I think it's been a little bit longer in the past. And they present their analysis of this case study, applying all the different lifespan issues and concepts that they've learned in the class. One of the things that we have them do is identify different ethical, legal, cultural issues or considerations when working potentially with this particular character as a client. So they're using media, they're using Zoom as the platform that we use to record their presentation. They submit that to the faculty, they get feedback from them. Sometimes they're able to incorporate that feedback moving forward. And then they go to the discussion board where they post their presentation and their PowerPoints, and then their help. They usually have a list of a couple questions to kind of help facilitate a discussion with their peers. And then students are required to watch, I think we've done 3 different presentations, and then they watch and engage in a dialogue with their peers.
Yeah, and since this is an early on class, when we ask them to identify counseling issues, so culture, ethics, we accept answers that we might not accept later on in the program. For example, well, I would refer this client because I don't have the knowledge and skills yet about, you know, working with X, Y, and Z. And so if they've identified that, they've used the ACA Code of Ethics, and they could say that they were not competent enough to work with that issue yet, we accept that answer. Later on in our program, we've really challenged because we can't, you know, it's not ethical to just refer. At some point, you need to have the knowledge and the skills. But since we have our students, if our students want to give either, you know, ideas of what they've done with this final project or just their experience having it in the beginning of the program, we'd love to hear from you.
I can go ahead. One of the things that I particularly liked about this class, because I gave you a little bit of background about myself, it had been more than 30 years since I had been in school. So deciding to go back to school and take these courses I wasn't sure how I would do after being out of being a student for so long. And I think what I learned from this particular assignment was how much of ethical decisions were infused in our everyday life. And as, I mean, I am the classic adult learner, having gone for so long without been in school, so that it made it more accessible to me to think it wasn't such a reach to have to learn all new things, that it may have been a product of what could be common sense, but then it got me into the book to see, oh, okay, there's an ethical component of this in A2C or whatever the section of the 2014 Code of Ethics was. And I thought it was a great way to tie practical knowledge with the book knowledge of the ethical code and put it together and see how it affects me in everyday life. So it felt more accessible to me to be able to learn ethics this way.
Yeah, I think for this assignment, I chose Meredith Grey from Grey's Anatomy. And I thought this was a good thing to do at the beginning of our courses, because typically TV shows or even books kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, exaggerate things. I think one of the scenes I chose was like Meredith in a counseling session, and it was there's a lot of dilemmas within that. So I thought this was a great assignment for the beginning or your first year in the program. And like Nancy said too, she's an adult learner. I was also considered that when I started. I think I got my second bachelor's in my like late 20s. So I also kind of fall in this umbrella of individuals. So.
And if I could follow up to what Kira was saying, is that I chose a book because, being older, that was a media that was more familiar to me. Do I love Grey's Anatomy? Absolutely. But I had been involved in this series of books that caught my attention. It was Nora Roberts writing as J.D. Robb. It was the whole In Death series. So I focused on a police officer because my experience has been in the criminal justice system. And that's why, I mean, it was just so awesome to be able to use that real world experience and infuse it with that now kind of coding of the ethical connection with this whole counseling field. So it was a really great opportunity to do that.
And it's really neat in the discussion then where everyone goes and posts theirs, because often, not always, but often students will identify a character, a movie, a book that others have read. And so it's applying that information to something that they're familiar with, but it's also equally unique and special, I think, for students to also, students will walk away and be like, I've never seen that movie or not, and then they save the PowerPoint and then they'll go back and watch the show. So it's really neat to kind of see that come alive throughout the discussion. And then the students become the expert, and then they're also teaching their peers and applying that knowledge as well. But we can move on to the second strategy.
So strategy 2 is highlighting we have a couple of tracks in our program. We have children and adolescents, we have military, and then we've got a general track. So strategy 2 is highlighting one of our asynchronous elective courses that we offer in the summer. It's 5 weeks, it's very intensive. But when you think about this, it could be something that you use for any diverse population or issue that you're wanting to focus on. I have something kind of similar in my trauma class that is in the summer as well. It's a presentation. But what this is, it's a partner presentation. So students do have the option of working solo. Again, it's a summer intensive course. So if for some reason they feel that they would be kind of a burden to their peers, they can work by themselves. They can also work in groups of 2 to 3. And they're to imagine that they're presenting at the ACA National Conference. And with their partner, they create a presentation that is educating the attendees on working with the military and their families. So how they go about this, what's really, really cool is like you get that peer collaboration, which is so important when you are, look at us at a conference, collaborating and learning from others. But you also get that conference experience, which students who generally take this class, they're more in their second year, it gets them thinking about how they can start advocating and applying this information out in the field. So participants identify a minimum of 3 challenges that veterans and their families face, and they can choose either reintegration back from a deployment or reintegration in the sense of transitioning from the military to the civilian sector. And then they evaluate 3 evidence-based counseling interventions to support the reintegration for the veteran and the family. So thinking about those 3 challenges, we're now pairing them with evidence-based approaches. And then in part 3, you can see that participants are evaluating a minimum of 3 ethical, legal, and or professional issues that counselors need to be aware of when working with this culture. And so that's kind of like the first step. But now that we've got our advanced learners, we're saying, in addition now, please discuss possible strategies to overcome these issues. So you're really taking it a step further and having them think about, okay, what can I do? Supervision could be a strategy depending on maybe someone, this I guess would be kind of a common example where individuals in this class have military connections. So they've served or they're a military spouse. And so depending on the challenge that they have identified, there could be some impairment or transference, countertransference issues. And so some might say a possible strategy would to be go to my own counseling or to seek supervision, consultation. So those are some things that we're seeing there, really again to get those students to be thinking of, now you've got this issue, what can we do to overcome it? So similar to the first assignment that we had shown, this is done kind of in partners or individually, and then it's posted to the discussion forum so that peers can comment and provide feedback. So peers might have picked different challenges or the same challenges, but what's really cool is they get to learn from their peers about different evidence-based counseling approaches or different ethical, legal, or professional issues that were identified. So that conversation goes a lot further because there's a lot of similarities and differences that can be discussed. I know that Nancy and Kira both took this military class with me. So if you want to share your experience with this assignment, please feel free to step in.
I can share. What was interesting to me was because if I recall correctly, this was actually one of the first classes that I took. And so hearing the experiences of other people as it related to the military, because I think at that time in our cohort was an active duty Army mental health practitioner. And so to hear the real-time issues that they were dealing with and how it affected people, especially on reintegration back to the community, I think was very powerful for me. I could do my presentation from what I would think they might be dealing with, but from actually hearing it from a classmate was really impactful. And if I were to go into that field to work with the military, that particular presentation was huge for me to be able to learn so much more that I don't think I would have been able to learn because it was fellow students' practical experience.
Yeah, and I really like this assignment too, because it gave us the option to work with a peer because we took it that one step further, like Dr. Pytel was mentioning earlier. And then I'm a military spouse, so I got a benefit of using all of this material personally and professionally. And it really just got your mind thinking of what kind of barriers to be reintegrated back into the civilian life, which I think is something that we don't really think about too often, that we can just kind of go back to daily living and that's that, but that's definitely not the case. So
Thank you both for sharing. And yeah, Nancy, that was perfect in the sense that you could hear from other perspectives too. When you present, there's this level of, yourself comes out because you can do that in a presentation. You can give personal experiences and examples. And so when you're watching it back as peers, the story really becomes life. And same for you, Kira, you can actually apply and you can share whether or not it applies or not as you're presenting in class, but it's certainly something for you to think about. How might this impact me moving forward in this work with this group, given that I'm connected? So I appreciate both of your comments. Moving on to the next and our last strategy that we'll talk about before we open it up to the group.
So like we kind of mentioned, and of course, every program does things a little bit differently, where you have the course sequence of lifespan, of multicultural, of ethics, of your electives. However, I think it's safe to say that pretty much all programs do internship at the last stage in the program. And so I have been very fortunate. I love teaching internship 1, and I'll be teaching internship 2. I smile because I've had Kyra and Nancy in those courses. And that was some of the feedback. We want you in internship 2. So it's really neat to just see the transformation that students make throughout the program. And so I enjoy teaching internship 1. One of the ways that I infuse ethics, because now they've learned everything that they need to, hopefully, in the program, and now an internship and practicum, they're applying what they're learning. So I do something similar in practicum, but I make it less formal, more of a discussion. And then when they move into internship 1 and possibly an internship 2, I have them do more of a formal case conceptualization presentation. Again, you can see the description of the presentation that they do in our group supervision or our Zoom class. And then here's the outline that I provide them with. So what they do is they, just to kind of facilitate that group supervision process, they identify a client, ideally maybe one that they want to get some feedback from their peers on, and then they sign up for a different week that they're going to present their case conceptualization presentation. That's a mouthful. And so they use this outline and create PowerPoint slides. So think about who is the client. They're obviously cautious to provide any identifying information. They identify what the presenting issue is, what are the major goals of counseling, how do they frame the problem. That is where they then identify not only strengths and barriers, but different ethical issues or considerations when working with this client. They also look at what their personal reaction is to the client, and then what are some goals, what are some things that they're hoping to get from their peers from this case presentation. So they identify a client, they do a formal presentation, they come to class and they present, which also gives them a great opportunity to present in a small group setting to hopefully gain some confidence. But then they're also incorporating what those ethical issues or cultural considerations are when working with this particular client. So this assignment, again, is tying it all in. They're actually, you all know this, in the field. They're applying concepts. They're applying everything that they've learned to a client that they're actually working with. So that is just kind of what this looks like. This may be a more common assignment, I'm not sure, in other programs. Nancy or Kyra, did you want to add what your experience was like with this?
I can go ahead first. I think at this part of the program, your cohort becomes so much closer because of everything that we've been through, that the strongest benefit that I see of this assignment was to get feedback from my peers, because everybody's in their own different internships, but also they've had all of this, their own life experience, and maybe has encountered a similar or identical situation like the one I'm going through. So the way I structured internship 1 was, these are the things that I want to accomplish, but I'm not sure how to get there. Can I get any advice? And then in internship 2, I think with my next one, which wasn't with Dr. Paycheck, but it was still now, I think I can get these. Can you give me any other areas that you think I'm overlooking? So you could even drill down a little bit further. So to me, it was that wonderful interaction of pointing out things that my classmates, my peers, members of my cohort have been through before that I hadn't even thought of. But then to be able to incorporate that the next time I saw the client, it was just, of all of the assignments that we've gone over, for me, that was the most valuable, because then I really felt like I was working toward being a counselor and not just learning about the rules and about how to do things. It was actually implementing them.
Yeah, Nancy, you really covered that well. And like she had mentioned too, in this point of the program, we're all pretty comfortable with each other. And I just really appreciated everybody's feedback. And then, after presenting, have you tried this, or have you tried doing that? Or I have a client that has similarities. They're not the same, but this is how I approached it. And did it work? Did it not? So like I said, Nancy really covered that well.
And Kira, how did it feel when your classmates said to you, wow, I never would have known how to do that? You did, and the way you explained it was so good. That was very reaffirming for me that maybe I am in the right place at the right time. Like I said, I don't know about you, Kira, but that was definitely the feedback that I had.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And one of the things I really appreciate in the group supervision process at this point is everyone in the cohort or in the class, they're all in unique, diverse settings. And so it's a great opportunity to also bring that knowledge and experience to others. So whether they're in a community setting, a hospital, whatever it is, we've had students bring really unique, not just settings, but also clientele that they're serving. So it also works as a great way, to continue that education, not just applying, like Nancy said, applying everything that they're learning, and maybe gaining some confidence that, hey, I'm doing this now. I'm a counselor now. But it also is a great way to really kind of educate the other groups. And I remember in the fall, after several presentations, students were like, wow, like I didn't realize you were working with, someone from that community, whether it was the military or LGBTQ plus or whatever it is. And so they really gave a lot of positive feedback and appreciated learning from all these different diverse experiences. Okay, so that concludes the main portion of our presentation. And so we just wanted to open it up to the group on, what questions, what comments do you have? Are there any questions that you have for particular assignments or ways that we incorporate ethics across the curriculum? Or perhaps this is also a great opportunity that social learning theory comes in and collaborating on, are there other assignments or courses that you're incorporating ethics into?
I have some thoughts. Can you hear me? I'm not sure. Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. You asked the first question, why are you here? I couldn't answer it. It just kind of looked interesting. I'm retired. I'm retired several times, and I had been teaching in the clinical psychology program at the LA campus of the Chicago School. And prior to that, I worked in the public education. I'm a clinical psychologist. But this just looked interesting. And then, so what do you do when you're retired? I have a small private practice, and I've been invested in the field of suicide prevention. So I'm the founder and co-director of a committee that meets with our coroner and medical examiner every month. We study the cases of kids that have died by suicide. And the last month, it was a heart-wrenching case of a high school junior who who died by suicide. And she lived in a little community in Los Angeles that's very isolated from the rest of the city, I mean, the rest of the county. And there are not too many services available. It's very hard to access services. The girl went to a Catholic high school. And unlike the school districts, the public schools that do a really, really comprehensive job of suicide prevention and preparing staff, this staff was totally unprepared, totally devastated. And it's a military community. The girl's father was in the military, and a host of issues came up. And so what do we do about that? There were many issues came up. In fact, unfortunately, the girl's mother died by suicide 2 or 3 weeks after her suicide. It was very devastating. And during our review, we learned that there was very little connection between the military bases in the community and the community itself. And so we're trying to figure out ways to bring everyone together. And as you speak, talking about the ethical issues of HIPAA, FERPA, all of the exchange of information. Oh, I can't disclose this because of FERPA and all the exceptions. This is a wonderful format that we might be able to use to do a community presentation in that community. I'm just thrilled that I attended today. I'm still thinking and processing what I'm learning, but it fits right into this way. And, I'm from the old school. It's always been a struggle when I'm teaching, dealing with PowerPoint and all of this, but we've got people that can do that. So anyway, thank you for the ideas. I'll be thinking about this for the rest of the week until we meet on Monday again. Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for sharing all of your work and the work that you're doing. When we think about kind of the case studies or the presentations, you're right, that's something that you could do to bring your community of providers together. You could say, we have this case, and you could share, the details that you're able to share that was probably in the news, or, you have permission to release. And then you have those questions like, what can we do better? And so, bringing a bunch of an interdisciplinary team, people from the school, people from the community, people from the military community, you can really generate those questions for discussion. And maybe it's something that you sort of send out before, like, this is our agenda, this is what we're going to talk about. Have individuals start to do their own work and to brainstorm ideas, and then come together as a group and share them. So they're kind of fresh, they're able to have that creative perspective versus you have them already in that group and they're already kind of hearing things, and less creative ideas come out. But it sounds great that you'd be thinking about how to use this platform, the online platform, to bring people together from all over. And maybe you team up with other organizations or programs for suicide prevention on the East Coast or other various places of the world. You can do that in the online platform versus being so stuck just in the preceding area. So thank you for sharing. That's a really good one we're thinking about. I know someone earlier had asked, they wanted some ethical dilemmas and some examples. I think you gave us a perfect one to think about. If that was someone's client, that was one of our students' clients or one of our clients, that's a very complex case. And when we're thinking of kind of the ecosystems that are impacted at various levels, a lot of people impacted. Other comments or ideas, examples
I have a question about like ethics in relation to advocacy for clients. If you've done any like assignments or like any other, I don't know, things with that.
I'm thinking, can you repeat that one more time as I'm thinking about it?
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of it was hard for me to get that question out, I guess. Okay, so do you have or have you like dealt with any ethical situations in teaching that I guess are related to advocacy for clients, like in communities or different like local government levels, things like that?
Good question. And Kira and Nancy, if you can think too, because I know we don't teach all of the classes, if you can think of other really good examples that professors have had. I would say like so at least in my military counseling class, there is a level of thought that goes into how would you advocate for this unique group. So that's something that we certainly talk about, and it comes out a lot in our discussions. I would say like with that, with the assignment that we used earlier on slide 10, the discussion does come about how would you advocate. So there is conversations about resources that are out there that are available to clients and counselors. I know in my trauma class in the summer, I use news sources. So I have students go out and they find a case in the news that they want to talk about related to trauma and stress. And one of the pieces in the questions, because that's kind of like you think about it, it's their case or their dilemma. It's now thinking about this case, kind of taking it a couple steps further. What are possible diagnoses? What are possible ways that you can go into the community as a counselor, thinking about the various hats that you wear. So not only as the clinician, but also as an advocate. So they do think about it in a couple of ways of how they could respond, knowing that as a counselor, we don't just do practice. There's a lot of other hats that we wear. So that's another just quick example I can think of in terms of when and where we get students to think about advocacy and kind of these dilemmas. In our ethics class, of course, we have a lot of dilemmas and case studies that we use, and we have that exactly like how would you advocate on behalf of this issue or this client? Dr. Paycheck, I see that you're.
Yeah. So one of the classes, I have not taught it for Lock Haven, but I've taught it for another another university, if I can talk correctly, and it's in the multicultural counseling class. And one of the assignments, I'm not as familiar since I haven't taught at Lock Haven. One of the assignments that I incorporated into that class was an advocacy plan. And so the students would identify a culture. So that could be military, it could be LGBTQ, it could be just any kind of group that they're interested in learning about or maybe have a passion about. And so what they would do is they would create an advocacy plan for it, of course, incorporating as well some ethical considerations. If you were to work with someone from this community, or this particular culture. And so what they would do is they would immerse themselves into the literature and to the research and identify how could this group benefit from advocacy? What needs maybe are not being met, whether it's academic or if it's something socially, if it's housing, there's a wide variety of ideas that I usually encourage students to identify with this. And then they actually come up with a plan on, okay, so we know here's the group, this is why we should advocate for them. And then they come up with a hypothetical plan on how would then I meet the needs of someone from this community. And sometimes they'll get really specific and look at a particular community that's not being serviced or met in their community, or it could be more global. But then what they'll do is they'll come up with a plan to include counseling services that are evidence-based with ethical and cultural considerations. And they will actually come up from start to finish with how would I meet the needs of this, someone in this group. Again, it could be housing, it could be food, it could be academics, it could be, whatever the research or literature is saying about mental health needs. So even I think about Michael kind of with that and what he was talking about, that community, that's very small community in Los Angeles that is kind of distanced a little bit from rest of the community. So that is one activity I've done, not at Lock Haven, but at another program. So that may generate some ideas.
Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah, so we are almost at time. We thank all of you for attending our presentation today. If you would like to contact us, you can see our contact information on the slide. There's also in the attachment, the Dr. Paycheck submitted to the chat, our information as well. So please feel free to reach out in any way that we can help you in the future. If it's learning ethics and comprehending it better as a student, or if it's ideas on how to infuse it in a class that you're teaching, we'd be happy to meet with you. Michael, if it's how to use technology to facilitate good conversations, we'd be happy to talk to you about that as well.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you for attending.
Okay, I'm stopping the recording.